MYST, the Book of Tiana continues with part 4.2 as read by the bathroom reader. I am covering for the Plurality Report, who has since decided to take up a musical career rapping over the tracks of Mozart's finest. They got back to the encampment 3 days later than they had planned to find that a message had been delivered from Donnie. It lay upon the map table in its dark blue waterproof wrapping. While Anna began to stow away their equipment, Atris broke the seal of the package and took out the letter. He knew it was not urgent. They would have sent a messenger into the age to find him if it was. But it was unusual. Unfolding the letter, he squinted at it through the lenses of his glasses. It was from his old friend Kedri, and concerned a query Atris had put to him the last time they had met for supper. He read it through quickly, then, smiling, he slipped the paper into his tunic pocket. "Well?" Anna asked, coming alongside him. "Anything important?" "No, but I need to go back." "Should we pack?" He shook his head. "No, I only need to be away an hour or two. I'll go later tonight. You can stay here. I'll come back as soon as I can." Anna smiled. "You should have a bath when you get back to Donnie." "A bath?" He looked mocked offended. "Are you saying I smell, Tiana?" "You positively reek of sulfur," she said, grinning now, "like old Beelzebub himself." He smiled at that. In the caves beneath the caldera, she had taught him much about the mythology and gods of the surface, including the demons whom, according to many religions, lived in the regions beneath the earth. "If only they knew the reality of it," she had said, "they'd be amazed." It was then that he had given her her new name, Tiana, which in Donnie meant storyteller, as well as punning on her surface name. "Do you need me to cook you something before you go?" "I'd rather you helped me sort these samples." "All right," she said, her smile broadening. "I'll do the tests. You can write up the notes." Atris looked about him at the tent. All was neat and orderly. His notebook was open on the small table by his bed, the ink of the latest entry not yet dry. It was time to link back. Anna was in her cabin. He would say goodnight to her, then go. Atris went outside and stepped across to the cabin, knocking softly on the door. Usually she would call out to him, but this time there was nothing. Pushing the door open a little, he saw that she was not at her desk. "Tiana?" he called softly. "Are you there?" As if in answer, he heard her soft snoring from behind the thin wooden partition. Slipping inside, he tiptoed across and, drawing back the curtain, peered in. Anna lay on her side on the pallet, facing him, her eyes closed, her features peaceful in sleep. The long journey back from the valley had clearly exhausted her. He crouched, watching her, drinking in the sight of her. She was so different from the women he had known all his life, those strong yet frail Donnie women with their pale skin and long faces. It had been more than 2 months ago when they had made their first and as yet only journey to the mountains north of the camp. On the way, Anna had collected samples of various native flowers for later study. Yet, coming upon the wonder of a snow-covered slope, the first she had ever seen or touched or walked upon, she had taken the blooms from her pocket and scattered their petals over the snow. He had asked her what she was doing, and she had shrugged. "I had to," she had said, staring at him. Then, pointing to the scattered petals, she had bid him look. Atris closed his eyes, seeing them vividly, their bright shapes and colors starkly contrasted against the purity of the whiteness, like life and death. It was then that he had decided, and every moment since had been but a confirmation of that decision, an affirmation of the feeling he had had at that moment when, looking up from the petals, he had seen her face shining down at him like the sun himself. Atreus opened his eyes and saw that same face, occluded now in sleep, like the sun behind clouds, yet still beautiful. The most beautiful he had ever seen. At first he had not thought so, but time had trained his eyes to see her differently. He knew her now. Atreus stretched out his hand, tracing the contours of that sleeping face in the air. Above it, a feeling of such tenderness pervading him that he found his hand trembling. He drew it back, surprised by the strength of what he felt at that moment. Overwhelming it was, like the rush of water over a fall. He nodded to himself, then stood. It was time to go back to Donny, time to face his father, Collis. "I cannot say that I have not half expected this," Collis was saying, "but I had hoped that you would perhaps have seen sense in time." "I am sorry that you feel so, father." "Even if it is as you say, Atreus, have you thought this through properly? Have you thought out the full implications of such a union? She is an outsider, a surface dweller. And you, Atreus, are Donny, a guild master and a member of the council. Such a marriage is unheard of." "Maybe so, yet there is no legal impediment to it." Atreus took the letter from his tunic pocket and placed it on the desk before his father. "I asked Master Kedry to look into the matter, and that is his expert opinion." Collis took the sheet of paper and unfolded it. For a moment he was silent, reading it. Then he looked up, his eyes narrowed. "And the age difference, Atreus? Have you considered that? Right now you are the elder, but it will not always be so. Your lifespan is thrice hers. When you are still in your prime, she will be an old woman. Have you thought of that?" "I have," he answered. "Yet not to have her, to have never had her by my side. That would be death indeed." "And what if I said I was against the marriage?" Atreus merely stared at him. Collis stood, then came around his desk. "You will not accept my advice, Atreus, but I shall give you my blessing. That, I hope, you will accept." "Gladly," Atreus said. Then, reaching out, he took his father's hands in the Donny way. "You will be proud of her, father, I promise you." Atreus linked back into the cave above the encampment. Stepping out, he saw that nothing had changed. In the moonlight, the camp looked peaceful, the tents to the left, the cabin to the right. Beyond and to the right, the waterfall was like a sheet of silver, its constant noise lulling him. Walking down between the trees, he found that he was whistling softly, an old Donny song his mother had once sung to him. He stopped, his eyes going to the cabin. There she slept, Tiana, his love. It cannot be wrong," he said quietly. Atreus felt a light touch on his shoulder and started. Turning, he found Anna standing there behind him. She was smiling, as if pleased by her little trick. "What cannot be wrong?" He swallowed. Now that the moment had come, he was afraid of it. Yet that fear was natural. It was there to be overcome. "You and I," he answered, taking her hands. Her eyes went down to where their hands met, then looked up to meet his own again. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I wish to marry you." Her eyes slowly widened. She stared at him silently, as if in wonder. "Well," he asked, when the waiting grew too much, "will you marry me, Tiana?" "I will," she said, her voice so soft, so quiet, that he felt at first he had imagined it. "You will?" Anna nodded, the faintest trace of a smile coming to her lips. "You will!" he whooped, then drew her close and for the first time embraced her. Her face was suddenly close to his, less than a hand's width away. The sight of it sobered him. "I will be a good husband to you, Tiana, I promise. But you must promise me something." "Promise what?" that you will be my partner in all things, my helpmate and my companion, by my side always, in whatever I do." Slowly the smile returned to her face. Then, leaning toward him, she gently kissed him. "I promise." Veovis stormed into the room, slamming the door behind him. He grabbed an inkwell from the desk beside him and hurled it across the room, shattering it into tiny fragments. "Never!" he said, glaring across the empty room. "Not while there's a breath left in my body!" His father, Rickeri, had broken the news to him an hour back. Atris was to be betrothed. At first, if anything, he had been indifferent to the news. He had not even heard that Atris was seeing anyone. Then, abruptly, he had understood. The girl! The surface dweller! Veovis stomped across the room and threw himself down into his chair, gnawing on a thumbnail. "Never!" he said again, the word hissing from him with real venom. His father had explained how the five had been approached, the documents of precedent laid before them. Again, that was Kedri's fault, the traitor. Atris need only go before the full council now to receive their blessing, and that was a formality, or had been in the past. Veovis took a long, calming breath, then turned his head, staring at the shattered fragments of glass as if he did not recognize the cause, then shuddered. "Never!" Atris stood before the five at the center of the great chamber. All were present. Lord Rahira had read out the formal request. Now all that remained was for the council to ratify the document. Rahira stared at Atris a moment, then looked beyond him, his eyes raking the levels of the chamber. "All those in favor?" There was a chorus of ayes, some reluctant, others enthusiastic. For 6,000 years the question had been asked and answered thus. Lord Rahira smiled. "And those against?" he asked, the question of formality. "Nay." Rahira had already turned the paper face down. He had been about to congratulate young Atris, but the single voice brought him up sharp. He stared at Veovis, where he sat not 2 spans behind where Atris was standing. "I beg pardon, Guildmaster Veovis." Veovis stood. "I said nay." Rahira's wizened face blinked. All 5 lords were leaning forward now, staring at Veovis. This was unheard of. "Could I possibly have your reasons, Master Veovis?" Veovis's face was a mask, expressionless. "I need give no reason. I am simply against." And he sat, as if that was that. And indeed it was. The verdict of the council had to be unanimous in this matter. Rahira looked to Atris. The young man had his head down, his own expression unreadable. Yet there was a tension to his figure that had not been there before. "Master Atris," he began, embarrassed. "It would seem—" Atris looked up, his pale eyes hard like slate. "I understand, Lord Rahira. The council has turned down my request." Rahira, marking the immense dignity with which Atris bore this disappointment, gave a reluctant nod. "So it is." "Then I will trouble you no more, my lords." Atris bowed to each of the 5 in turn, then, turning on his heel, walked from the chamber, his head held high, not even glancing at Veovis as he passed. "Atris, come now! Open the door!" Tessera stood before the door to her son's room, her husband just behind her in the shadows of the corridor. When there was no answer, Tessera turned and looked to her husband. "Why did you not say something in the council, Carlos?" "I did," Carlos said quietly, "but it made no difference." "And is that it, then?" she asked, incredulous. "One man says nay, and nay it is?" There was the grating metallic noise of the latch being drawn back, and then the door eased open an inch. "Forgive me, Mother," Atris said from within the darkness of the room. "I was asleep." "I heard what happened in council," she said. "We need to discuss what should be done." "There's nothing that can be done," he said. "The council has given their answer." No word then of Veovis, no individual blame, as if this were the genuine will of the council. "Nonsense!" she said, angry now. Pushing past him, she went over to the table and lit the lamp. Tessera turned, looking at him in the half-light. Atris's face seemed gaunt, as if he had been ill, but he was still, beneath it all, the same strong man she had bred. "I know you, Atris. You are a fighter. I also know how much Tiana means to you. Now, will you bow before this decision, or will you fight?" "Fight? How can I fight? And what can I fight with? Can I force Veovis to change his mind? No, neither he nor the council would allow it. As for persuasion, then beg." "Beg? If Tiana means that much to you, go to Lord Veovis and beg him to change his mind, and grant you what you want. Go down on your knees before him if you must, but do not simply accept this." "On my knees?" Atris stared at his mother, incredulous. "Yes," she said, standing face to face with him. "What matters more to you, Atris, your pride or your future happiness?" "You want me to beg?" Tessera shook her head. "You said yourself, he will not be forced or persuaded. What other course is open to you?" "Atris is right." Both turned. Anna was standing in the doorway. "Tiana, Atris began, but she raised a hand to bid him to be silent. "I know what happened. Your father has just told me." "Then you must agree," Tessera said, appealing to her. "Atris must go to Veovis." "Maybe," Anna said, nodding to her. Then she turned slightly, looking to Atris lovingly. "You know how proud I would be to be your wife, Atris, prouder than any woman in the whole of Dani. Yet I would not have you go down on your knees before that man, even if it meant we must spend our lives apart. It would be a violation, and I could not bear it. But there is, perhaps, another way." Atris raised his eyes and looked at Anna. For a time he simply studied her, and then he nodded. "So be it then," he said. "I will go to him, but I do not hold much hope." Veovis agreed to meet with Atris in his father's study, Lord Rakeri a silent presence in his chair, there to ensure that things were kept within due bounds. "So what is it that you want, guildsman?" Veovis said, standing 6 paces from where Atris stood facing him, his hands clasped behind his back. Atris met Veovis's mask-like stare with his own. "I seek an explanation for your vote this morning." "And I decline to give its explanation." "You do not like her, do you?" Veovis shrugged. "As I said." "You decline to give your reasons." Veovis nodded. "You recall our meeting in the shaft all those years ago?" "What of it?" "You recall what happened afterward? How I helped save your life?" Veovis blinked. He took a long breath. Then, "I was very grateful for your actions. But what of it? What bearing has it on this matter?" "You made me a promise, remember? You said that if there was anything I wanted, anything that was in your power to grant, then I should come to you, and you would grant it." Veovis stood there like a statue, his eyes like flints, staring back at Atris. "Do you remember?" "I remember." "Then I ask you to keep your word, Lord Veovis, and give me your permission, before the full council, to marry Tiana." Veovis was silent for a long time. Finally he turned, looking to his father. Rakeri stared back at his son a moment, his eyes filled with a heavy sadness, then gave a single nod. Veovis turned back. "I am a man of my word, and so your wish is granted, Atris, son of Carlos. But from this day forth, I wish neither to speak with you, nor hear from you again. Whatever once existed between us is now at an end. All promises are met. You understand?" Atris stared back at him, his face expressionless. "I understand, and thank you." "You thank me?" Just go, for I am sick of the sight of you. Part 5. The Philosopher. The vestibule was packed with guildsmen, grand masters and their assistants, great lords and other humbler members of the Central Dani Council, all waiting to enter the great chamber for the debate. As ever before any momentous occasion, the place was buzzing with talk as small groups of cloaked members gathered between the fluted marble pillars to indulge in informal discussion of the new proposal. At the center of one of the larger groups stood Atris, whose proposal it was. In the 15 years since he had returned to the council, he had established himself as the unofficial leader of the more liberal faction in the house, and was often consulted by the five on matters of policy. Today, however, he was distracted. "Any news?" his friend Oren of the Guild of Chemists asked as he joined the group. "Nothing yet," Atris answered. "She'll be all right," Penjewel, another close friend and a master of the Guild of Legislators, said, laying a hand briefly on Atris's shoulder. "I guess so," Atris said, but his concern was clear. "So how will it go today?" Oren asked, looking about him at the dozen or so masters who formed the core of their faction. "Does anyone have a clear idea?" There were smiles. Oren, as a chemist, always wanted a certain answer. "Whichever way it goes, it will be close," Hamel, the eldest of their group and Grand Master of the Guild of Messengers, said, pulling at his long white beard. "Much will depend upon the eloquence of our friend here." Oren looked to Atris. "Then we are lost," he said, a faint smile at one corner of his mouth. "Master Atris has but a single thing in his head today." Atris smiled. "Do not fret, Master Oren. I shall be all right. Having to speak will distract me from more important matters." All nodded at that. Though the proposal was important to them all there, Tiana's health was paramount. Indeed, without Tiana there would have been no proposal, for it was she who had taken them down to the lower city to see conditions for themselves, she who, in the main part, had drafted the proposal. "They say Veilvis is to speak for our opponents," Penjewel said, looking across the vestibule to where Veilvis stood, beneath the great arched doors in the main chamber, surrounded by the old men of his faction. "Then the debate will be long and hard," Tekis of the Archivists said wryly. "Long-winded, certainly," Penjewel added to general laughter. "Maybe," Atris said. "Yet I understand Lord Veilvis's objections even so. He fears that this change is but the thin end of the wedge, and he is not alone in fearing this. Our task is to allay such fears, if not in Veilvis, then in others who might vote with him. They must see that we mean exactly what we say and no more. Only then might we win." There were nods all around at that. "And if we lose?" Oren asked. Atris smiled. "Then we find other ways to help the lower city. As Tiana has often said to me, there is always more than one way to skin a Riku." The chamber was silent as Veilvis rose from his seat on the lowest level and, turning, looked about him at the gathered members. "Guildsmen, my lords, as you know, my task is to persuade you not to adopt this rash proposal. I do not think I need say much. As the present system of governing our city has worked for more than 5,000 years, then one might argue that it has worked well." Veilvis paused, his eyes resting briefly on Atris, who sat not 5 spans from where he stood, watching him intently. Yet there is another issue here, and that is the question of who runs Dani. Such measures as are proposed might seem innocuous, yet they are guaranteed to encourage restlessness among the common people, for having tasted power, if only of this limited kind, then would they not want greater power? Would they be content to remain thus limited? Besides, as we who were bred to it know to our great cost, power is but one side of the equation. Responsibility is the other. Power can be given overnight, but responsibility must be taught. Long years go into its making. Do we not, then, ask a great deal of these common men, however good their intentions, in expecting them to shoulder the burden of responsibility without due preparation? Of course we do. It is not unfair to ask them to be as wise and knowing as ourselves, when all they have known until this time is service. It is. Veovis smiled. And that is ultimately why I say nay to this proposal, because of the unhappiness it would bring to those who presently are happier than us. Why give them such care? Why burden them with it? No, fellow guildsmen, let us be content and leave things as they are. Say nay as I say nay, and let us be done with it. Guildsmen, my lords, thank you. Veovis sat, to a murmur of approval. At a signal from Lord Rahira, Aitra stood. Guildsmen, my lords, as you may know, my wife Tiana is in labor, and so I too ought to be brief. There was laughter. Even Veovis gave a grudging nod. However, let me just say a word or two in answer to my fellow members' comments. I understand how busy Lord Veovis is, yet if he had read my proposal thoroughly, he would see that what I am proposing falls far short of the kind of power he suggests we would be relinquishing. Not only that, but I find myself in profound agreement with Veovis. Power is not a thing to be given lightly. And yes, responsibility is a grave and heavy burden, and ought to be something one is schooled to bear. That is the Dani way, and I would not have it changed. Atris paused, looking about him, his eyes going from face to face among the circular levels of the great chamber. Let me therefore say it clearly for the benefit of all, so that there is no mistaking what I am asking you to agree to today. I am as one with Lord Veovis. All matters of policy and funding must remain the prerogative of this chamber. I do not contest that for a moment. My proposal is designed to give, not take, to empower the common people of Dani and give them a degree of control over their lives that at present they do not have. Atris smiled. I see that some of you shake your heads at that, but it is true, and some of you have seen it with your own eyes. Our people, Dani, like ourselves, are not poor, nor are they hard done by. They have food and shelter, sanitation, and medicines if need be, but, and this is the vital point, their lot could be improved, greatly improved. He looked about him once again, scrutinizing face after face. I know what some of you are thinking. Why? Why should we be concerned about improving their lot? Well, let me give you two good reasons. First, just think of whom we speak. We are not talking of idlers and spendthrifts and good-for-nothings, but of good, hard-working people, men and women both. All of us here know a good dozen or more such people. We meet them daily and depend on them for many things, and they depend on us. Second, it is often said, with justifiable pride, that Dani rules 10,000 ages, yet a society ought to be judged not merely by the extent of its empire, but by the quality of life of all its citizens. We are a rich people. We can afford to be generous. Indeed, I would argue that it is our moral duty to be generous, especially to our own. And that is why I ask you, fellow guildsmen, to say aye to this proposal. For Dani, and so that we might in future look ourselves squarely in the mirror and be proud of what we have done here today. Guildsmen, my lords, thank you. As Atris sat, Lord Rahira signaled to the stewards at the back of the hall. Veovis and Atris had been the last two speakers. Now it was all down to the vote. Rahira waited as the 8 stewards took their places. It was their job to count the hands raised both for and against the proposal. When they were ready, Rahira looked to his fellow lords, then spoke again. All those in favor of the motion, raise your hands. The stewards quickly counted. And those against? Again the stewards made their tally. Thank you, guildsmen. The stewards turned, making their way down, forming an orderly queue before Lord Rahira. As each gave his tally, Rahira wrote it down in the great ledger before him. As the final steward turned away, Lord Rahira quickly added up the 2 columns of figures, then looked to either side of him. It was a protocol that the 5 lords did not vote unless a decision was so close, within 3 votes, usually, that their opinion could decide the matter. Guildsmen, he said, looking back at the rank after rank of members seated around and above him, it appears that you are divided on this issue. 182 members for, and 180 against. In the circumstances, the 5 speak for the proposal. Veovis was on his feet at once. But you cannot, my lord! For what good reason? He fell silent, then bowed his head. Rahira stared at the young lord a moment, then stood, signaling to all that the proceedings were over. The council has spoken, Master Veovis. The proposal is carried. Swarnir closed the door quietly behind him, then turned, looking across the lamplit room to where his friend Veovis sat in the corner chair, lost in thought. It was some time since he had seen Veovis quite so agitated, and even though he had calmed down considerably since the council meeting, there was still a brooding intensity to him that did not bode well.
Would you like a drink?
He asked, going over to the great stone cupboard beneath the window and picking up one of the 3 crystal decanters he kept there. Veovis glanced up, then shook his head. Swarnir shrugged, then poured himself a large drink. He took a swig from the glass, then turned, facing Veovis again as the warmth of the liquor filled his throat. There must be something we can do, Veovis said quietly, as if speaking to himself. Swarnir smiled.
Maybe there is.
Veovis's eyes widened with interest. Go on.
There is a man I know,
Swarnir said, taking the seat beside Veovis.
They call him the philosopher. He writes pamphlets.
Pamphlets! Veovis made a sound of disgust. Really, Swarnir? I thought you were being serious.
I am. This philosopher is a very influential man in the lower city. People read his writings, lots of people, and they listen to what he has to say, more so than Tiana and the reformers.
And just what does he say? Swarnir sat back.
That would take too long. You ought to read 1 or 2 of them for yourself. You would like them, Veovis.
Veovis stared at his friend skeptically, then reached out and took the glass from him, taking a sip from it before he handed it back. And what name does this philosopher go by?
Agaris.
Veovis roared with laughter.
Agaris, the fraudster? It was never proved.
But Veovis waved that away. The guilds do not expel their members on the strength of rumor, Swarnir. Besides, I was there when Agaris was ripped of his guild cloak. I heard the charges that were on the roll.
That was 50 years ago.
It does not matter if it were 500 years ago. The man is untrustworthy.
I think you are wrong. I think he could help you.
Help me? How? By writing a pamphlet about it? Swarnir looked down. He had never heard Veovis sound quite so bitter. The defeat today had clearly hit him hard, more so perhaps because of who it was had swung the vote against him.
The philosopher has no love of outsiders,
Swarnir said, staring into his glass.
Indeed, he argues that the mixing of bloods is an abomination.
Swarnir looked up. Veovis was watching him now. He says that?
That and much more. You should meet him.
Veovis laughed sourly. Impossible.
Then you will just sit here and brood, will you?
No, Veovis said, standing, then reaching across for his cloak. I will go home to Kavir and brood, as you clearly do not want my company. Swarnir put his hand out, trying to stop his friend.
Veovis?
Tomorrow, Veovis said, brushing his hand off. "I will be in a better mood tomorrow." Swarnir watched him go, then sighed. Veovis was in a bad mood right now, and closed to all suggestions. But maybe in a day or two. He smiled. Then going over to his desk, began to pen a note.